There were a couple of near flashpoints. There was one incident where a helicopter fired at an APC at Carrick-Arnon. The APC was going to return fire, but the turret got jammed, which was probably fortunate. My name's Tony Martin. I've lived in Dundalk all my life. I joined the FCA, which subsequently became the Army Reserve, when I was 15. Like many others, I lied about my age. It was one of those things that we did in the school. There was a school platoon, and it was one of the sort of rites of passage. You did it or you played Gaelic football, and my preference was to go shooting with a rifle that the state was paying for. I worked in Uri, which was a bit difficult to a certain extent because I could see what was happening, and I was building up to a head of steam, and it was quite obvious something was going to break. There was this attitude afoot, and you could see the whole thing building. And I went to camp we went in August 1969, and it was a normal routine camp. It was great. The weather was beautiful. We were enjoying ourselves, and I had met somebody in Skerries previous weekend, and I was heading out the gate with a pass in my pocket for Skerries that evening. Military policeman stopped me and says, "Where are you going?" I said, "I'm heading for Skerries. I have a pass." He says, "I know there's a confinement on." I said, "I'm not a regular. I'm an FCA man." He says, "It's for everybody. You go back to your unit and you get back into your uniform," which I did. You were told to clean your rifle in preparation for firing, and we were issued with 50 rounds of ammunition, and we were put into billets. And sometime in the early hours, we heard trucks, and that was those Austins that were pulling a battery of 25-pounders, which from our point of view was a very unusual sight. And our understanding was that we would cross into Newry and try and hold Newry and protect it against attacks from loyalists coming from places like Kilkeel, because Newry is obviously a nationalist town. We were 2021, 18, 19, 20, 21. Of course we were excited, but very apprehensive. The funny thing about firing a rifle when you're being trained, on the range you're handed your clips of ammunition and you load your rifle and you take your fire orders and you get down and you fire at the target in front of you. When somebody hands you a bandolier of 50 rounds and that's yours, be careful with it, and don't load your weapon until you're told to. Yeah, you feel a bit strange. Quartermaster that was giving us the ammunition said, "Lads, you better take Newry police station as quickly as you can, because that 50 rounds a piece isn't going to last very long. You're going to need to top up." Well, which was, I suppose, a jocose way of looking at it, but it summed the situation up. We did nothing on Thursday, which was the 14th, sort of just scratching around. We were tired. I think we were probably allowed to go to bed for a while. And, of course, rumour upon rumour started. And strangely, actually, on the Friday, which was the 15th of August, and we were talking about a different world, it was a church holiday. And there was a mass parade. I don't know if the army does mass parades anymore. But everybody, if you could walk, you were marched down to the garrison chapel in Gormanston camp. And the one thing that struck me when we came out from there, busloads of civilians had started to arrive in the camp. And these were people who had arrived from Belfast. They had been burnt out of whatever the streets they lived in. And they started to arrive, and then everything was changing. We returned home that evening, and our company commander told us as we were leaving that, things have changed, lads. When we left Dundalk, it wasn't a garrison town, hadn't been a garrison town for 20 or 30 years. It now is once more a garrison town, and still is. We weren't utilised until towards the end of 1969. I think there was a bit of ambivalence towards us. People weren't altogether sure of our loyalty. FCA men, if push comes to shove, which way they're going to jump. And I was sort of conscious of that. And I must say that generally the guys were loyal. We had taken an oath. We stood by the oath. A few people abandoned it. And then towards the end of 69, we started to do installation guards, and there were places like electricity transformer and transmission stations, water storage facilities and stuff like that. So we did checkpoints, we did patrols, we did whatever had to be done. And a lot of guys spent a lot of time and gave a lot of their time to back up the regular army. There's an article published by a former battalion commander of ours, long dead, a lovely man, Jack Ronan, and it was about the other border battalion, the 8th. And he sort of writes it within that article that without the 8th Battalion, the security operation that was mounted at the time could not have been done. That tends to get forgotten. It was difficult. I remember we weren't involved, but there was a thing, it was referred to as the Court Ban incident. There was a guy, I think there were 2 British armoured cars. One had come, but both across the border, but they set the rear one on fire, the IRA, which I suppose tactically was quite clever because the front car couldn't get back. So the front car ended up in the Garda station in the Crescent. But I remember troops going out from here, and the driver in a Panhard armoured car was sitting on the side of the road, and one of the IRA men was arrested, was walking past, and he looked in at the driver and he says, I know where you live. So there was an element of that, you know. Nothing happened to the guy, but yeah, it was a very strange time, and people's loyalties were something that, you know, that caused them problems at times. If you spin back to 1966, we had a year of absolute jingoism. The 50th anniversary of the 1916 Rising. And you had military parades, you had all sorts of stuff. And a lot of incendiary speeches were made about, you know, the objective of a united Ireland, and the ideals of the men of 1916 must be pursued and all that sort of stuff. But that was empty rhetoric. I mean, you were pursuing them with no resources. And you had to be realistic. Relationships with the British Army were strange at times. There were a couple of near flashpoints. There was one incident where a helicopter fired at an APC at Carrick-Arnon. The APC was going to return fire, but the turret got jammed, which was probably fortunate. At times there were less than complimentary words exchanged across the border between troops from both sides. And I think possibly British troops weren't well enough informed of what they were dealing with when they came to Northern Ireland. And some of our lot might be hotheads and think, oh, there's a Brit, you know, what's he doing in my country? So there's a bit of that. If you were out with guards, the guards were the prime force, they were the premier force. You were there purely to provide an armed presence to support them. And if you needed a checkpoint, or if there was a request for a checkpoint, it would come from the superintendent to the barracks and you would respond. But troops never took the initiative. B Company of our battalion was, I suppose, unique in that it made a significant weapon contribution to the Provisional IRA at one stage. They used to have a training hall in Drogheda, the Sluagh Hall, close to the Lourdes Hospital. And I suppose they never thought it was going to happen to them. But they had a training night on, and a few guys arrived and relieved them of a number of rifles and submachine guns. And I remember meeting them afterwards at a shooting competition. I used to fire a submachine gun competitively. And I looked at the gun one of them was holding and said, geez, that's a new one. How come? He looked at me and says, are you winding me up? It was a new one to replace one of the stolen ones. So, yeah, you're aware of people, you're aware of their connections, you're aware of their loyalties, you know, but they weren't doing you any harm, so you weren't doing them any harm, you know. And, well, the IRA have always said that they wouldn't do anything to the servants of the Irish state. So you felt you were safe enough. Would I do it again? Yeah, I would. And you look back on it now, retrospectively, you can see a lot of mistakes that were made. People didn't talk to each other enough. Mind you, having said that, it's still the same, particularly in Belfast. But yeah, my father, God rest him, was horrified because he'd been a regular army sergeant during World War II in the Irish Army. He was what they called an E-man. He joined for the emergency period, and he'd been a battalion orderly room sergeant, and he did not want his son wearing a uniform because I suppose he knew what it was like. But I held on, and as I said, eventually got commissioned and retired in 2003 at 55 years of age, which was 10 years ago. So still have loads of kit at home. My wife says to me, when are you going to get rid of that? And I thought, she says, you're never going to need it. And she said, when are you going to use a flak jacket again? Plus it wouldn't fit me.